the first thing that I do is go back and say, I don't know how to figure this out, they will be like, okay, but I mean, that's the job. You have to figure it out. If you cannot do it, someone else will do it. When in reality, there's nobody, I dare to say this, there's nobody who can figure out all the questions, right? They are there probably because I'm like, by now I know my strength. I know I'm really great at building products to go from like 1 to 100, to build the org, to build the strategies, like all that is my strength. But then if I don't know exactly how to solve a specific B2B problem because I've not done before, I can ask for help. Or like if I've never done a crowdfunding campaign, or if I've never done like, which I was part like raising, like, funding in general, I can ask for help.
Hey folks, before we get started with the show, I wanted to offer you the chance potentially of a lifetime. If you're looking to get your brand in front of the boldest thinkers in business, this is the place to do it. The Unlearn Podcast is downloaded in over 85 countries with a growing audience of over 100,000 listeners per month. That includes C-suite leaders, startup founders, and executives from Fortune 500 companies to scaling startups. We're ranked in the top 1% of business podcasts on Spotify and Apple across multiple regions. But our listeners just don't stream, they stick around, with 85% completing the entire show on their first listen. If your brand wants to align with bold ideas, breakthrough thinking, and a global audience that's not afraid to challenge the startup quo, get in touch. For the first time ever, we're offering sponsorship opportunities on the show, and we'd love to have you with us. Enjoying the podcast? Don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. This way, you won't miss any episode, and it greatly supports our podcast. Welcome to the Unlearn Podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Francesca Cortesi, a product visionary, transformational leader, and someone who truly understands what it takes to build beloved products and high-performance teams. Francesca was the Chief Product Officer at Hemnet, Sweden's leading property platform, where she played a pivotal role in scaling the product and driving the company to a successful IPO in 2021. Under her leadership, Hemnet achieved consistent double-digit growth, became one of Sweden's most appreciated apps, and stood out as a top performer in the Swedish stock exchange. But her story goes far beyond business metrics. Francesca led cultural shifts, transitioning the company into new languages, increasing their female representation, and going even further about what was possible. In this episode, we go back to look at her entire career, from starting in the fashion business in Milan to moving to Sweden on the whim to be a translator, and later becoming a product leader to help grow and IPO one of Sweden's most successful companies. It's a fascinating story of hers and her own personal learning and unlearning journey. So let's dive in and hear where it got started for Francesca. It's amazing to have you on the show. Obviously, Deanna introduced you, which is great. But as I was doing my research, I'm always fascinated by people's stories and how they ended up sort of doing what they're doing today, and it never seems to be like a straight line. It's never like
No.
people sort of planned they would end up doing what they're doing. And you're sort of another, I guess, a great example of that. Someone who obviously started off your career, obviously working on big projects, but have sort of developed into a chief product officer and doing all these various different roles. And now, if you will, like starting to run your own business, which again is a great transition in itself. So, for many people who are probably, looking at your LinkedIn or following your website, they're wondering, how did Francesca sort of land there? But when you think back, is there a moment that maybe even at the time you didn't think it meant a lot, but in retrospect, it was sort of a real turning point in your career or how you started to approach your work life?
Yeah, and I mean, I think the word is a bit like, I'm gonna be black and white here, but it's a bit like two people. Either someone who can lay out like all their life, where am I gonna be in 10 years? This is my goal. I wanna get there. And of course, there's a lot of detour in between, but they have a clear path, or people who don't. And I would say that I started my career where I had a really, really clear goal. I wanted to work in fashion, and I was in Milan, and it was like highly competitive industry. And, I broke into it. Like after, I don't know, I mean, I was like doing all the crazy stuff, like sending the physical letters, knocking at doors. And finally I got into it and I was working with it. And I thought that was like my path. Until, to your question, there were, I think, 2 trains that passed, like those trains that pass and you're like, I'm gonna jump on it or not. The first one was actually a train that I did not know that I wanted to jump to. It was basically, I was in fashion, put a lot of work into it. I was really enjoying it. I was doing even like great step in my career. I was about to get promoted. And then I got like a job offer in Sweden. And that happened because my then boyfriend decided to move to Stockholm to do his PhD. And I was like, yeah, you go, like I'm not gonna give up everything that I did to follow you, but you go. And then one colleague of his basically sent me this job opening that was there. It was for a translator, so nothing to do with nothing that I was doing. And I was like, yeah, of course, I'm there, I'm visiting him, I can do the interviews. And during the day, I did, I think, 3 steps of the interview on the spot because they knew that I was not based there. And then I got the offer. And that was the first like turning point. I was like, am I gonna do it or am I not gonna do it? And maybe a little bit naive with a sprinkle of cockiness. I don't know. I thought, I went into fashion in Stockholm, in Milan. I can do it in Stockholm, right? So I was like, yeah, I'm going to take the job. I'm going to move and then I'm going to, go back to my work. And I took the job. I moved. But as things turned out, I couldn't go back to fashion. Like, strangely enough, that to me still it's a bit. I was like, why wasn't I able to do it? I mean, I've done it in Milan. Why can I not do it in Stockholm? And I have it, I don't know, 5 years working in Milan in my resume. That must be worth something. And I studied the language and I did my best effort and I went to a lot of interviews and I got so many doors shut in my face. And that was not like the best period in my life. But
Yeah.
that's when, another turning point happened. I must be honest, it's not that, the movie style that you're like, oh, it was so dark and gloomy and I was miserable, but then a light opened up. It was not like that. I was really, really miserable for a long time and I tried hard to get into fashion again. And then I realized, okay, this thing is not going to work out for me. So either I can continue, like head down and at some point I believe it will happen, and I can actually like dig deeper and understand what's happening. That's what I did, and that's what actually started to understand what do I actually like to do. And that's when I rolled into product development. And I was in that moment in a context as was in a company that gave me that possibility. And back then there was not really, product manager as a role, but I was doing the job. So that was like basically the 2 turning points at that point for me were one, a decision that someone else made of moving somewhere else. And then, something that happened. I was like, okay, am I going to take this opportunity? And that led to a lot of, I don't know, no's probably, and shut the door that made me reconsider what I wanted to do. And I mean, I want to say that I'm in product since 15 years ago. And that was probably the best outcome of a shut door in my face that I could think about.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing story. Like kudos to you, first of all, putting yourself in those uncomfortable positions or, trying something new and backing yourself and going for it. Like many people we've even had on this show often shared how they've struggled with that, right? And I really appreciate you also sharing that, not all of these experiences are sort of Hollywood movies either,
No.
where, it is tough, like a lot of these ideas of putting yourself out there and experiencing, a negativity or negative outcomes, or as you say, doors being closed in your face. Like it's a huge hit on confidence and asking yourself, how can I move forward? And certainly, I've definitely experienced these things in my own career as well. Like whether it was a different startup that we were trying to get off the ground and who we thought our customers were told us they weren't and would never buy the product, or fundraising for businesses, talking to investors, and they're saying that that's not the type of business that they like, or it's a bad idea, or it's never going to work. like this constant sort of challenge that you face to keep going is extremely hard. But yet you have persisted with this, and you've come out the other side, which is fantastic. So, tell us a little bit about some of those, if you will, like experiences and the type of businesses that you were working in. As you say, you started off in fashion, then you sort of come into this sort of, I guess, project management world that is evolving into product management at this time as well.
That's
Tell us a
correct.
little bit about some of the things you had to sort of unlearn, and maybe some of the things you could take with you from previous experience that helped you be successful as you started to, find the new path for yourself, but also be part of this transition that was happening from project management to product management.
Yeah, and basically, like what happened in those 15 years, I'll try to make it really short. But actually, I mean, there were some things like talking from the unlearning angle, some things that help me and some things that like hinder me in my career. Because as I said, I mean, I was working in fashion and I mean, you could say that I was doing project management because I mean, organizing events, organizing press days, or like these parts were really events, but they were physical events, right? And nobody wanted anything digital. They wanted to be in Milan and experiencing the shows. Still, to this day, I think there's like a huge component of like presence in that business. But then when I moved to Stockholm, I did first I did obviously the translator job for a while, not long. But then I transitioned into digital project management because what I realized that I had the toolbox is just that I had to adapt it to a new context. And in that matter, I think there's like maybe not the learning part, but more like for anyone wanting to jump into a new role or a new career, I think it's really important to understand that you come with a toolbox. Unless you're straight out of school, you probably come from a toolbox and you also have your strength or what you like to do. So if you can combine those, that's like really a path to entering a new career, right? That was for me. So I went from physical project management to digital project management. I was working for this company that was doing games and communities. And they are basically like I was doing, like in that perspective, the job was really similar. So you have to do like a list of tasks, you have to deliver in time, you have to deliver in budget, you have to coordinate resources, you have, to do communication, a lot of really similar things, with the biggest difference being that the digital part, and here comes a little bit of the learning, the digital part is more unknown and it also offers more flexibility. Because if you think about like organizing a fashion show, I mean, you have different parts. You have like someone who has to choose the model, someone who has to prepare the collection, someone who has to ship the collection. You have the catering, you have the press. But all of these things, yeah, there are some variables, obviously, but I mean, they're pretty much constant. But then insert digital, right? I mean, we all know like the code was more complex than we think it was. We need to, like people react in a different ways and they're not buying. We need to twist. So that part, I think, like triggered in me something else. And it was not that much about the project management job, but it triggers a lot of questions. It's like, why don't we think about this? Why don't we do that? Why are we picking this? Why are we not thinking about the other angle? And I started to ask a lot of questions, and probably people got a little bit annoyed by me. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
great.
that,
Yeah. Good.
exactly, in a way, great, because that opened up the whole product management thing. And this actually happened a couple of times in my career. This like curiosity of like trying to understand and being maybe opinionated in like the right environment basically put me in a position where the person on the other side of the table said, okay, if you're so opinionated, then try it. Can you show me better? That's basically when, I mean, I started like doing product management. I started with something that today you would call product-led growth, because I was responsible with a cross-functional team to work for the 20% top player in the community that were like the ones bringing in 80% of the revenue. So
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have really, a product, we had customer success, we had marketing. I mean, we had it really cross-functional. That was also my first time as a leader. like formal leader. Obviously, you always are an informal leader when you work in a group and you work in product. But I have like staff responsibility. That was also a huge unlearning curve, going from, kind of mirroring what my boss had done with me, previous boss, and trying to find my own style. But I would say, like, in those 15 years, I had to learn a lot of things. And one thing that maybe I want to highlight, because I changed, I mean, not enormously many companies, but maybe 4 or 5. And during the years, the role of product also started to crystallize a little bit more. When I started, we didn't even have a name for the role. And then obviously, while I was changing company and I interviewed for product management role, product lead roles, etc. But I was coming with my baggage of experience of what a product person is. And every single time I have to leave that behind, because what product manager do or product lead do or CPO do is so extremely contextual. And I know we say it depends, but I think this is like something that I want to give to anyone listening. If you, the first days or weeks or maybe a couple of months, feel like, I don't know what I'm doing here, like what's happening, it's not you. I mean, it's like it's part of the unlearning process, especially because many times, and I see it when I recruit as well, people tend to move, you're in a startup and you want to try like a big company, or you're in a big company, you want to go to a scale up. You're in a scale up, you're going to go to corporate. And when you do these changes, your role is not the same. So you have totally to change your mindset of what people expect from you, what is your responsibility, what are like the boundaries of what you can impact, etc. And that was like at the beginning for me, at least, a really hard thing to unlearn.
Yeah, no, it is extremely difficult. And again, it resonates a lot, I'm working back in a startup now at the moment. It's a venture studio. We've been going for almost 4 years, but it still very much still feels like it's only the earliest days of it. But even in that time, like I have probably done, I would say about 5 different roles, ranging from obviously being an early co-founder, so you do everything, but I've had responsibilities around managing our portfolio of startups. I've had to be a product leader inside one of the startups. I've had to focus on building a fundraising pipeline now for these startups. Like, it's the job sort of changes all the time, I think if I even changed my job title, I'd probably be changing it every 3 months just for fun. But one of the things, though, that you're saying, something I've certainly come to be more comfortable with, is that a lot of the time, everywhere I go into a new task or a new assignment or a new focus area, really thinking actually about how do I start with a beginner's mind on these things, and it being okay as well that I mightn't know everything, and also being quite open to trying things that I have never done before, right? Like that's something that I think I've got more comfortable with over time. I still remember, not even so long ago, even when we were doing the initial first crowdfunding for our studio, and that was one of the first jobs I got. I was lucky enough to be nominated to run the crowdfunding campaign. And I was like, well, first of all, I've never done a crowdfunding campaign in my life. So, and
But
I was
let's
saying
do
this
it.
to the
But
team.
let's do it. There's always a
Exactly. Yeah.
first time, right?
It is, yeah, and I remember like the thing that was the most empowering of it all is that I sat down with the team, and one of the first things I said was, I've never done this before. I'm going to need all your help because I have no idea how to do this. And so if anyone has done this before or has ideas, I'm all open to them. And it was kind of, in some ways it was, you can feel when it's a new group of people you're working with, that can feel kind of embarrassing or putting yourself out there. But the response I got was nothing but positive, of the group saying, yeah, well, we've never done it either, so let's all figure it out together. And in a weird way, it sort of set us up as a culture in the team that it was going to be okay to sort of say, I don't know, and let's find out the answer, rather than this sort of notion of everybody knowing, oh, I know the answer to this, I'm going to get it done. And yeah, that's helped me a lot. I think sometimes just sharing with people that we're all going on a sort of discovery journey, whether it's in a new role or it's a transitioning into different roles or even in new companies. Everyone, I think it's a really important part of it.
I can totally recognize this, and I can just plus one it, because there's no silver bullet, but definitely like a beginner mindset, and kind of like going into, I have to reinvent myself. And it's not even like new, as you say, like as the company grows, like you always talk about company growth, right? Like we want it, like we want to have it sustainable, we want to make new things, we want to have new customers, we have new markets, but this comes on the back of it, with a company that needs to transform. And I mean, that idea is really ingrained, that is really important, and it comes obviously with seniority. But I think there are two other angles to it, at least from my experience. One is the cultural angle. And I mean, it depends a lot, like, what you're describing to me. I would just like any day of the week, if I'm not able to do it, I will just like ask for a help and see how we can figure it out. But in not all the company there will be, or not all the cultures that will be perceived as positive. Which brings to the second part, which many times the barrier to come there, it's also personal. And I've been like myself in this situation, for example, where I was promoted like in the company to a new role, like when I went from project to product, or when I was like PM, and then I became CPO. And I was like, in retrospect, put so much pressure on my shoulder, thinking, okay, someone gave me this responsibility. If the first thing that I do is go back and say, I don't know how to figure this out, they will be like, okay, but I mean, that's the job. You have to figure it out. If you cannot do it, someone else will do it. When in reality, there's nobody, I dare to say this, there's nobody who can figure out all the questions, right? They are there probably because I'm like, by now I know my strength. I know I'm really great at building products to go from like 1 to 100, to build the org, to build the strategies, like all that is my strength. But then if I don't know exactly how to solve a specific B2B problem because I've not done before, I can ask for help. Or like if I've never done a crowdfunding campaign, or if I've never done like, which I was part, like raising, like, funding in general, I can ask for help. But that, I think it comes with a personal barrier. And I mean, I experience for myself, and I see it many times with people that I work with, and I try to coach this. It is okay to ask for help. You don't have to have it all figured out. You have your strength, you have your weaknesses, and that's part of you becoming more senior, not saying all the time, I got it, I got this, I'm gonna, bang my head on the wall until I figure it out. But it's not that. I think in my experience, at least, I'm really curious to hear yours, Barry. It's like it's something that needs to be taught, and also that needs to be, or coached, or whatever you want to frame it, but also needs to be part of the culture of the company.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Like it's one of these things I think is counterintuitive when you're starting out your career. There's always the pressure to succeed and grow and have all the answers, or even our schooling system is designed on people knowing the answer rather than asking a better question. But that sort of breakthrough that anybody can have to realize, oh, wow, like it's actually, there's moments where asking for help can actually motivate a wider team and actually gain you more credibility than overreaching and trying to know the answer. And I agree, coaching has a huge amount of that, and even cultures where, I know I struggle in cultures where it's about this sort of always having the right answer. These sort of, for me, they're sort of pathological type cultures where it's like this sort of, people are looking for ways to sort of catch you out, versus generative cultures where you're thinking of, well, how do we build on this idea? How do we be better together? And that for me is a huge part of what has helped me find places and teams and people that I could work better in and with, and or even try to move the culture, at least of the people in my immediate, if you will, working network, to start to think like that, to then propagate that culture more widely in a company or a team. And it's a huge part of the success. So building on that then, let me ask you then, about maybe the industry, right? As someone who, as you're describing, like you've sort of come up through this very interesting path of, if you will, physical products with the fashion industry, moving to digital and building these great communities, right? And then you spent a lot of time, obviously, over the last number of years, building a company as chief product officer, taking it to IPO, which is an amazing experience to go on. And now you're starting to have your own consultancy. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what are you seeing in the industry, if you will, that might need to be unlearned, that you felt as someone who's sort of done, again, these experiences of growing a company and taking it into the public markets. Most people dream about doing that in their life, and as an experience. So what has encouraged you then to want to go and help people from an independent point of view?
That was like another learning experience, and maybe I'll wave that into like the what do I see in the industry. And let's put a little bit of context. I've always in my life worked with either startup or scale-ups. And more or less when company reached like 400 people or so, that's when I started to feel like that's not for me anymore. And this was also, to say this that I'm saying now, is like was a learning perspective. Because what I've always thought about is a bit like of a linear career. Like, what I had is like, oh, the company evolves and I evolve with the company and I change my role and I take new things and etc. And then I realized that those other new responsibility or these other new things that would come my way were not really what I was liking or what I was good at. And that was extremely, extremely, extremely painful from a personal point of view. Because I started to feel like I was not living up to expectation, that I was not doing my job right. And I was started to say like, okay, is it me? What am I doing wrong? And it took a lot of time, introspection, 2 coaches. And I actually realized that as the company evolved, the company has different phases, right? We always have show as product people like the different adoption of a product. And then you have early adopter and you go up and you have the majority and then you have the laggard and then you have this and then you have that. And we know all the things that we need to do in all the different phases, right? I mean, that's in the books, that's what we do, that we're used for. But in those phases, if you put people in those phases, there's also extremely different responsibilities. And that's what I had to unlearn. That, I mean, it's okay that like you and your company go at different phases and there's no match anymore. So what I realized, I realized 2 things. One, the painful one from a personal perspective, was that I actually, in all that pain, a little bit like all those shut door in my face, in all that pain that I was like feeling slightly out of place, I realized where I want to be, where I want to operate, with kind of zone I want to be, which is like companies that have reached market fit and they have to scale, which like it kicks in a lot of different things. It's really different if you go from 40 people to start scaling to 100, 200, 300. And then you suddenly need a strategy, and it's not enough that you talk with your buddy, next to you, and you need to alignment, and you need much more people management, and you need to coach, and you need to hire, and you need to redefine expectation because there are new people coming in. All this, maybe you hear in my voice, I think it's awesome. I mean, that's the best thing that's where I want to work. And when it starts to get more like product is already, in place, and it's like we need to more work within stricter boundaries, which happens, when the company gets public, etc. I realize that's not for me as a product person where I want to be. And that's okay. So that's where I made the decision, which also I've never thought in my career before that I could do advisory or consulting. But that's what I'm doing now, and I'm really enjoying it because I get to, my deal is that like I can get to work with 2 or 3 companies that are on this stage in parallel, and I can take I can accelerate one, I can take the learning that I have in 15 years, and two, I can accelerate the impact I have, because I can see like, different things in parallel happening in different companies, with all the it depends that is in there, obviously, but a lot of things are really similar. So, I mean, that part, I think it's like from an industry perspective, we need to understand that as company grows, as we want them to grow, because I mean, that's like generally, right, in a way or another, we also need to adapt to the people behind the company. Like, what does it, like the personal impact, both like on roles, but also another concrete thing that I did beyond what was happening with me, really putting into place processes where I think it was 2 or 3 years, but I was feeling it like on my fingers. Like, okay, here too many people are coming in. They come from different expectations. They were PM, engineering manager, UX at another company. They work in a different level, and there were a lot of like friction. Like, what is my role? What do I have to, what is success look like? When you start feeling like that there are like too many of these questions, this means you have to stop and to redefine expectation. And not only on, like, I've done it both on the PM level, because I'm in product level, because that was more like on my direct responsibility, but
Yeah.
also generally in the cross-functional team. So having really, I mean, we literally had this, I've done it a little bit different depending like on the stage of the company, but having this sitting down and asking you, like, it would be like, Barry, I mean, you're a PM here. Tell me, what do you think is your responsibility? Like, and then is like, you go there and you start, like, the first time I did it, like I did it with 6 people, 6 different answers, right? So you can
Yeah, always. Yeah,
back to that, you can surface. We have really different expectation. So you expect this, but this is not the role. Like, you had people saying, oh, I expect to make all the decisions, right? That's never you're always gonna be disappointed. Like, or others that were like, oh, I want to work only with my team, or I want to make an impact. Okay, but what does impact mean? So you start to create like this language first in the group, but then you have PM, but you also have engineering manager, which is also another role which is not standardized in the same way
yeah,
in all the companies. And you also have, like, even if you think developers, which you may think, okay, this is straightforward, a developer develops, right, in their platform. But it's not like that, because, for example, we started in this time also work with product trios, what Teresa Torres talk about. And in that perspective, developers are encouraged to talk with customers. And that was also like, we expect at least one developer in the team to go out to talk with customers. This is not an expectation that all developers have in all company.
yeah.
Sometimes it's the opposite. We expect you to only write code, to, sit in your corner, write code, and, don't do anything else. So it's like working with this as the company evolves, like I put really as part of the structure of the process. And that was extremely helpful to push us on the next phase. But I mean, to summarize really long answer to your question, I think industry needs to be much more intentional of what it take, like on a personal level, to drive growth, and also be extremely mindful that we have a role, the one of product, but even the one correlated with product, that are evolving as the craft is evolving, and the way of working are evolving, and as the company are evolving, as the different industry are working. And we really need to take that into perspective and do not think, okay, a product manager knows how to work here, or we know how to work together, because that's, in my experience, that never happens.
Yeah, no, like these are all great lessons that you're sharing. One from your own personal perspective, right? Understanding as a company evolves, so to do you with that company, and even your own role and expectations, like that resonates for me a lot. Like probably the last company I was in as a full-time sort of, if you will, employee was a company called ThoughtWorks. And when I joined the business, there was a couple of hundred people in the company max, and it was sort of dispersed across North America and Europe. And like we intentionally had no managers It was sort of like one of these design choices that the founder, Roy, sort of made a choice upon, which was sort of chaos in a way. It was like you rock in and I remember my first day, I started in August and I was going on a holiday and I was like, oh, well, who do I tell that I'm going to be away on, this Friday and this Monday I'm going away? And people were just like, oh, no, you just take the time off. It's fine. And I'm like, well, who do I tell anyone? They're like, no, just if you're not on the project, off you go. And to me, I just thought it was sort of like shockingly, but fun at the same time, but that business grew massively, eventually IPO'd on the US. But as the company was growing, I could sense like my effectiveness in it, at least from my own point, started to sort of dilute,
Mhm.
as the amount of people that it sort of grew. And maybe similar to you, I sort of landed on this premise that I really like being in businesses under 500 people, maybe even smaller than that too as well, and maybe just 200, because I feel like I know everybody in there, and it gets me excited, when I'm in these sort of massive corporations. I find it too much of a quagmire. I don't really know what's going on, so that resonates massively about also recognizing where I feel my strengths and competencies are and where I can contribute. But then that also, as you say, it happens to people. And I would see that again and again, even as ThoughtWorks was growing, as we grew, we attracted a different type of talent as well. Not better or worse, just a different type, like these were folks that, as you describe, you weren't really a startup or a scale up. Like we were moving from scale up, if you will, into sort of, I don't know, like a global corporation, which means you need people who know how to manage 100 people and who know how to run, big programs of work, who are very, very different stylistically from the people who are like three
Yeah.
people in the back of a shed trying to get something off the ground, and many times I would hear this sort of culture clash, or as I think a better way, as you're describing it, expectation clash between folks who were coming from a context of growing these businesses from, whatever they were, multi-million to like 100 million type businesses, and versus the folks that were there when it was like, imagine we could make 100,000 a month or
Yeah.
something like this, and it was never for me whose time was a better time in the company or what was a worse time in the company, or it was just a different style, and I think one of the things that were the people I saw do this really, really well was actually Atlassian from a product management point of view. I went to a talk, sort of many years ago in San Francisco around Mind the Product, actually, which I know we both know people from there, and one of the things they were sort of talking a little bit about is like, what does it take to be like a product manager here or a senior product manager here or a principal product manager? Jeff Redfern had just become chief product officer at Atlassian at the time. It's probably about 7 years ago. And he had been the chief product officer at LinkedIn before that. And he was actually helping because Atlassian was doing all of these acquisitions. And you had people coming from different companies where they were in a startup. And then you had very established people that were coming from big corporations. And there was no way for people to understand, like, what are the expectations of me when I'm doing something, And yeah, it was one of the more enlightening talks I saw where he really talked about creating a system of expectation. If you're a junior product manager, like, this is what here's your next growth areas that we're looking for. Right through to, if you want to become a chief product officer one day, like, here's the things I'm dealing with and how I'm trying to solve them. And you need to be thinking about, and I just thought it was a very enlightening into building that system for scale. And yeah, it's just, you're just reminding me of all this as you're sort of sharing your own story of doing that for your company, which
Yeah.
again is admirable to do that and now help other people. So, what has been probably the big unlearning moment for you then, as you now flip into this sort of advisor versus operator role that you were in before? What are some of the things that have sort of jumped out to you, and maybe that you're most excited about looking forward?
Yeah, I think, what I'm super excited about, I'm taking, for the first, no offense, maybe I'm gonna offend someone like listening, but I see like as an advisor, I actually come in like working hands on with the strategy, right? The company you're in this stage for a reason or another, like you feel like, oh, we need to grow faster, something is not really working, or new owners come in and you have to readjust. So in a way, I'm really doing like similar job that I was doing before, but I do it like not 5 days a week. So I do it like more fractional. So there are on a personal level, that's a huge unlearning. Huge, is like I'm so used to work. I've done it, I don't know, 20 years, in a company, not even, obviously no one that is have been through IPO is, it's more than 9 to 5. But you put like all things and you don't really think about the time. And you go in and you think about 10 years, etc. And I have still the idea of like thinking of 10 years because I'm building something for when I advise like long term. But I have to be so much more mindful about my time, because that's a huge unlearning curve. And Barry, I'm not on the other side of this. I'm still like in the middle of the mess, to be
Yeah,
completely
that's all right.
honest. I think that's, again, you have a different role. Like, what are the expectation others have on you, and more importantly, what is the expectation that I have on myself? And I had like one of my people in my network that told me, you have to stop thinking as in-house, right? Like, because I was, yeah, it's another mindset, and I want to keep having that I'm here for building long term. I don't want, just to deliver some PowerPoint. That I really want to keep like really with me, but also have to balance it out. I cannot, do it for think about it day and night as I used to in the same way. But then what also I think it's interesting is that what I see is that I can take a lot of what I've learned and take into the new context, which is obviously where I create the impact faster. But it's always, always, always interesting where I come in and I say, okay, we can maybe think about doing it this way. And then someone who deeply know the context of that company, of that specific thing we're trying to do, say, yeah, but there's always a but. So there's never like a blueprint that you can like copy paste, but you can have like what happens. And what I think is interesting is that you have the overall direction. And then that's when the magic happens, right? When I probably can see the overall direction, and then I have someone on the other side who is, one, open. So that's a learning for them as well, open to hear like feedback, but also to give more context to moving decision forward. I think that is like the big thing. Like, you, even as a advisor, consultant, whatever, you need to take only the directional parts with you, and not being too into detail, because those will not work. Depends too much on context.
Great. Well, look, it's been amazing to hear your story. It's a phenomenal story from, as you say, starting off in the fashion world of Milan to being in Stockholm and taking a company public there. It's an amazing story. I'd really encourage folks, go check out your website if they want some help and building and going on that journey. I'm sure they'll reach out. And thank you very much for sharing your insights and experience with us on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Barry.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found this episode useful, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please consider leaving a rating or a review, as it helps others find our podcast. For more episodes and details about the show, visit barryoreilly.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.